Following the collapse of a multi-storey building under construction in Victoria Street this afternoon, multiple disaster service personnel, including SAP search and rescue teams with sniffer dogs, are currently involved in a rescue operation to retrieve 53 trapped construction.
Considered one of South Africa's deadliest construction disasters.
Rescue operations continue at the border.
Today marks exactly 1 year since 34 people were killed in the George residential building collapse. As their families, friends, and the 28 survivors pause to hold a memorial, justice in the wake of evidence of poor workmanship remains elusive.
Red patient.
We cross to News 24 journalist Nicole McCain, who's in George for us next.
It was really a somber moment. We had some beautiful song by some of the local choirs, and in the background you could just hear the family members breaking down. You could hear them wailing. The emotion was so heavy.
Later in the show, government touts a new big fund for black businesses and vows to protect it from graft. And finally, Trump now wants to make Hollywood great again with more tariffs.
To stay tuned to The Lead for every edition, hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels.
My name's Graham Roben. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. On the 6th of May 2024, at just past 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and all within the space of just 5 seconds, some 6,000 tons of concrete collapsed at George's Victoria Street 5-storey apartment building site. Construction worker Gabriel Gwamba lay entombed in this rubble for the next 118 hours before his miracle rescue.
I was thinking I'm gonna die because it's not easy to stay with that place. It's not easy.
I was sleeping, so I heard something, the radio for the people, you see. So I wake up. So if inside I see the light, so I call the help. So someone talked to me. What's your name, sir? I say, I'm Gabriel. From Monday I'm here. I'm stuck in here.
Finally freeing Gwamba after such a long period, especially as statistics show that the survival rate quickly dwindles, is a moment that's stuck with the province's rescue authorities since.
Yeah, that's the day we got to Gabriel Gwamba. I think that was one of the nicest feeling I ever had in my life. So that's just, listen, after 118 hours, he was trapped in that building. And now all of a sudden he's getting out there. It's give you just more guts to go on with the scene and work. Yeah, that was an amazing feeling.
Now you can watch Gwamba's full interview in News 24 special documentary After the Fall that's brought to life by video journalist Luke Daniel. Today, a memorial was held in the Southern Cape City for the 34 people who perished. Public Works and Infrastructure Minister Dean McPherson also briefed journalists on investigations into the disaster, because no one's been held criminally liable for the deaths as yet. News 24 journalist Nicole McCain is in George, and we cross to her now. Nicole, thanks so much for joining us on The Lead. It's our very first edition together.
Oh, yes, it is.
Tell our listeners today what that memorial service looked like in George. It was at the main town hall, is that right, Nicole? A lot of, obviously, the survivors and their families had come out and pay their respects and to think about this intense tragedy 1 year on. Take us inside that hall and what it was like for a journalist to cover that today.
Sure. So we had a packed hall today. We were looking at about 500 people, various family members, survivors. Many of the survivors were there, as well as members of the public, various authorities. Some of the first responders attended today. Some of the canine unit were there. But it was really a somber moment. We had some beautiful song by some of the local choirs, and in the background you could just hear the family members breaking down. You could hear them wailing. The emotion was so heavy, just as people really were in that space again. I mean, that was the hall where the families waited to hear whether their loved ones were alive or dead. It's only meters from the site where the building collapsed. It's across the road. So it's, of course, a very charged space for those families to be in. They bring all of that emotions. They're surrounded by other families who've gone through this ordeal with them, to connect with survivors, many of whom have debilitating injuries, who are still struggling to recover both mentally and physically from the trauma of being in a building collapse. So yes, it was an extremely emotional day.
Sure. Did you manage to speak to any of those particular survivors? Of course, in our documentary put together by videographer Luke Daniel, I mean, we speak firsthand and across your reporting with one of the main survivors, Gabriel Gwamba, of course, 118 hours trapped underground. He was fortunate not to pick up major sort of injuries here, but many of the 28 survivors have been injured. Did you catch up with any of them?
Yes, we spoke to quite a few survivors today. There are some who are double amputees who have had both an arm and a leg that have been amputated, others who have lost a leg, many who still need crutches or walking sticks to be able to move comfortably. And of course, these are laborers and construction workers and people who rely on their physical ability for work. So many of them, apart from recovering from those illnesses, also have had that loss of income that comes with not being able to do that physical work anymore. And of course, it's extremely emotional for them to gather to see each other and to remember their colleagues who only moments before the building collapsed, they were working side by side with, they had relationships and friendships, and they might have shared a meal together. And to see the photos of those people that they knew so well who died when they survived.
Prior to today's events, you had spoken to some of the key rescue service authorities that were on the scene from the local George Fire Department and EMS crew that was on the site of the day. What were some of the interesting stories that they were telling you? Of course, the one about Gabriel Gwamba, the one fire chief was basically stating that, it was one of the happiest moments in his entire career to finally come across, somebody that had survived that long under the rubble.
So yes, there were two things that stood out from the first responders. Firstly, that nobody expected a disaster of that scale. Very often when rescuers get a call, it's, there was an accident. There's not a lot of detail to go with it. And the first responders thought, well, it's maybe a wall or part of a roof. There's no way that it could be a whole building that's collapsed in the middle of George. So there was that initial shock and disbelief to arrive at a site and see 5 stories, 6,000 tons of concrete, all just collapsed on top of each other, and to have no idea who was on site and how many people they were looking for. And then secondly, I think was just this amazement at the resounding success of the rescue and recovery operation. It's very similar to the conditions that you would get in an earthquake where a structure's collapsed. But South Africa doesn't have earthquakes. We don't have dedicated specialists in this kind of urban search and rescue. We do often send teams to other countries to assist, but it's not sort of a dedicated speciality that we have teams in. So to arrive on a scene like that and to still pull out almost 50% of the people you're looking for alive, and some of them 2 or 3 days, and of course with Gabriel 5 days later, is an incredible feat. Those are odds that you don't see in earthquake situations or generally in structural collapses. And a lot of that has been attributed just to the fact that response workers were there so fast. They were on site within a couple of minutes. They could start triaging. They could start figuring out who was there. And of course, that is the golden window. Those first 24 hours is when you can make such a big impact. And they really did. And they managed to save an incredible amount of lives.
And that's most definitely a testament to the overall South African experience when it comes to those first responders, right? We always hear about these fantastic success stories. We have probably amongst the best in the world just because of so much trauma that they had to deal with. And here comes this quite rare, unbelievable, unprecedented case, probably one of the worst in South African history that we've seen in the longest time. There's been this forensic report that came out, Nicole. It's compiled by the National Home Builders Registration Council. I know one of your colleagues has done more extensive work here, but that report did reveal that there were sort of design failures, weak concrete use, safety features that were apparently ignored via the inspections. I remember the one part of the report pointing to massive sort of cracks in the basement walls. That was sort of one that was quite an eyesore that was caught quite early on. The findings do indicate that criminal proceedings has to follow, although that process hasn't really sort of started yet. What do we know at the moment just assist with the police's investigation. I understand that's not really come to fruition yet, right?
So there's a lot of moving parts in terms of investigations. There's multiple probes that are underway. There is one from the provincial government that was started almost immediately after the collapse, as they were taking rubble off the site that was being inspected, and they were starting to develop that report. That has been concluded. It is currently with the police. We've also had the probe that you mentioned with some quite shocking findings. That has also been completed. And then we have some outstanding ones. The Department of Labour, the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure has also commissioned a report. Those still need to be finalised, and that will, of course, feed into the overall police investigation. What we do know is that the police investigation is at about 65% of the way complete. Only once it's completed will we have any sense of if there will be criminal charges, who could be charged criminally, and what that would look like in terms of prosecution.
Minister Dean McPherson, he was there today in the George Main Town Hall. He sort of alluded in his press advisory that he would be briefing journalists on the status of the investigations under his sort of department. Any real progress there? You did already allude to the fact that that's not completed yet, right?
Yes, so the minister said today that is likely to be completed at the end of the month.
Okay.
He has committed that he will come back to George and meet with the families at the end of May and give them the results and the findings of that report. So we'll have to wait and see what comes out of that. And of course, that he has already committed will be given straight over to SAPS to help them with their investigation.
A lot of accountability, some would argue, would have been with obviously the more local authorities of things. George Municipality, of course, was going to be brought into the equation sooner rather than later. They have sort of distanced themselves quite a lot. They'd been accused as a council in the past of approving plans after the building had started. They've sort of denied that. Has there been any other word from the municipality or the mayor since then?
No, they've been quite steadfast in that response. They've said that they've done everything that was asked of them. They've towed the line, met all of their commitments, and they haven't said anything further than that.
Sure. I think just to end off, it genuinely feels like one of those sort of like rare South African stories that shouldn't have happened. If I recall at the time I was studying over in the UK, and then suddenly this breaking news alert came up about this unbelievable tragedy. Really the scenes of, the television crews on scene and all the journalists waiting for news for people to be pulled up from the rubble is the sort of stuff that you would often see on international news channels, whether it's like a mining disaster, if you will. But here was something happening in our southern Cape town of George, who's not often in the headlines for much. How did the story affect you as a journalist? Was it one of those sort of like unprecedented moments for you?
We just didn't realize the magnitude of the disaster. And it's absolutely one of those stories that you don't forget it. It shapes your career. It takes so much of you emotionally to report on it. You're interviewing survivors and family and first responders and people who've lived through the worst day of their lives. And that leaves its mark.
Sure, absolutely. That's Nicole McCain, one of our star News 24 journalists, doing an impeccable job. Fantastic reporting. You and Luke put together some really great work, of course, with the rest of the colleagues that covered this entire story from front to back and all angles covered. Nicole, safe travels back to Cape Town.
Thanks, Graham.
To our trending topic now, and don't worry about the government's new 100 billion rand transformation fund from falling into the wrong corrupt hands, claims Deputy President Paul Mashatile. The fund will be protected by being placed within the presidency's control, he promises. Well, that's what he told those in attendance at a business breakfast hosted by Trade, Industry and Competition Minister Parks Tau this week. The goal of Tau's fund is to bolster black economic empowerment, and Mashatile was emphatic about fighting corruption, whilst ensuring the fund, in partnership with Microsoft, would boost the township economy and assist black business owners in rural areas, both in tech and non-tech, over the next decade or so. It's an interesting development to watch following a recent joint survey by News 24 and Ipsos, which revealed that just less than half of those queried believe that BBBEE should continue in its current form. At the same time, speaking at a Commonwealth gathering on anti-corruption this week, Justice and Constitutional Development Minister Mameloko Kubai stated that had South Africa not stopped state capture when it did, we would have been reduced to a failed state today. Kubai warns that like multinationals, corruption itself has globalized too. Those stories are thanks to journalists Soyiso Marliti and Jan Gerber. And finally, make Hollywood great again. Well, that's certainly the thinking behind US President Donald Trump's latest overnight decision to slap 100% tariffs on all films shot outside but shown inside America. The news has seen the movie industry's stock prices fall, with executives wondering how such a move will be policed and whether or not television series apply. Entertainment lawyers argue Trump's hasty call doesn't make any sense because what if, for example, Mission Impossible star Tom Cruise has to do a stunt off the Eiffel Tower in Paris? Will that hurt the production more? Well, the US movie industry fears Trump's tariffs will drive up the cost of flicks that shoot abroad for obvious creative reasons, doing more harm than good. Still, since the global pandemic and the writers and actors strike of 2023, Hollywood has generally struggled to get back on its feet, especially as many other countries lure US film companies with lucrative tax rebates. The White House says it's still working on making Trump's directive a reality. Well, from Southern Cape disasters to Trump's tariffs on flicks, the Lead's got you covered with editions dropping at 7 p.m. in the evenings, Monday to Thursday this week, and of course the next and after that. We'd love more of your mails, comments, and especially voice notes. Mail us at thelead@24.com to be heard in your next edition. In our last one, we received a mail about an apparent tip-off that we might be looking into. And to be reminded of our next shows, hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels. My name's Graham Robenheimer. So long as there's news, we'll have the lead.